Absolutely no way. What the actual fuck? Did you seriously, truly, genuinely get that on camera? Oh my god, yes, I just completely and utterly shit myself, guys. Seriously, I mean it. It was right there, directly in front of me. Its terrifying face just now, a mere moment ago. I am not scared. No, not scared at all. I am definitely not scared. There it is again. Oh my goodness, there it is, right there. It's still there. Let's go down slowly, carefully, this way. Don't be afraid. Absolutely do not be afraid. We must go this way. The house, this entire structure, it's alive. Damn it, the house is undeniably alive. That's it. I've had enough. I'm not afraid of war anymore. Not a single battle. I am on top. I am absolutely on top of this situation. I am.
The firefighters will come here, Sash.
Stay here downstairs. It hit right around here in this general vicinity somewhere. Fuck. Fuck. I got that on camera. Fuck. Our brains are overflowing. All right, hid quickly. Where did you come out from?
Friends, these are actually massive strikes. Ask. First of all, let's start with the fact that in Novorossiysk, a large landing ship of Project 1171, the Soviet Tapir, was damaged. In Taganrog, a unique flying laser aircraft, the A-60, one of only two in existence, was destroyed. And most likely, strategic bombers Tu-95 MS were also damaged. Cheboksary, Tuapse, S-400 air defense sites, the Beriev aircraft plant, drone factories, and oil refineries were all hit. And all night long, from Kerch to Sochi, Russia was attacked by drones and missiles targeting military units. Reports say that the long-range Neptune was in action. And the General Staff of the Armed Forces has confirmed strikes on Cheboksary. In Ukraine, the military attacked a plant producing navigation equipment and components for cruise and ballistic missiles at the Progress Research Institute. We'll discuss all of this, the missile and drone strikes on Russia, with renowned military analyst Roman Svitan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Roman Grigorievich, where shall we start? What, in your opinion, are the top strikes?
Novorossiysk, of course. How many times have we talked about the fact that there are two such sacred cows for the Russians, Moscow and Novorossiysk? We won't reach Moscow until we either get ballistic missiles or a large number of about 1,000 cruise missiles and drones, because otherwise we won't be able to break through Russian air defenses. But Novorossiysk is sacred. Why is Novorossiysk sacred? Because it's entirely possible to send these drones in from the vast sea, especially since the Russians currently don't possess. After we effectively drove the Russian Black Sea Fleet far, far away, and I mean literally, the Russians were forced to row all their old dilapidated tubs out there on oars. We decisively drove them out, and now we have the significant opportunity to approach the land from the sea almost entirely without any significant problems or major resistance from the Russian side. There is even a whole series of compelling videos, quite serious and undeniable footage, clearly showing how their Pantsir systems are desperately firing at our drones as they are forced to retreat. So the drones come in from the sea, pass through, and the Russians in Tuapse start shooting at them almost as they're leaving. In other words, there is an opportunity that is Novorossiysk, Crimea, Novorossiysk. In other words, military targets along Russia's Black Sea coast and our Crimea are being taken out from all sides. That's why, of course, Novorossiysk, it's sacred.
Roman Yurievich, what was attacked? Let's start with the large landing ship of Project 1171. The Soviet Tapir, one of the three remaining in existence, reports. How serious is this? It was hit. And were these also drones? The floor is yours.
These were definitely drones because it's too far to reach Novorossiysk with missiles, so most likely it was drones. The Tapir, yes, it is indeed a remarkably large landing ship, a truly formidable vessel that possesses the unique capability to land directly and effectively on an unprepared, undeveloped shore. So basically, it's quite a good catch, a very valuable asset to have, all things considered. The question is, how badly was it damaged? Well, as they say, the patient is alive, but his health will never be the same. That's for sure. So this one is out of commission. Our Ukrainian security services had been hunting it for a long time. It's definitely with their involvement that such matters are resolved. They possess a sufficient number of highly dedicated and reliable informants who consistently make it entirely possible to meticulously prepare for and effectively carry out a complex combat mission, even at a very great distance from their operational base. The Tapir didn't sink, but I'll say it again. Its health will never be the same.
Roman Lvovich, as I understand it, a military unit was also attacked. The S-400 air defense system, and not only that, we also attacked there in Novorossiysk as well.
This was a coordinated attack. First, drones come in and, as they say, close the eyes of the air defense. Basically, they blind it. After that, you can do whatever you want for a certain period of time. The attack was clearly well prepared, and aviation specialists definitely took part in its planning. Everything was timed precisely. The waves of the attack first took out the S-400, disabling it from combat duty, and then they got to the Tapir, that large landing ship, and then they moved on, right nearby, just across the bay, to Cheboksary, which is an oil terminal.
Roman, regarding this Cheboksary plan, as I understand it, we've attacked it again. It's one of the largest oil terminals in Russia. This is already the second strike. In your opinion, how serious is the damage now?
It could handle almost 40 million tons of oil per year. So for the Russians, this is a very serious loss, truly serious. So naturally, well done again to the security services. Plus, a large number of our other special services were involved here as well. And directly, the Air Force participated in this. In this attack, several oil transshipment terminals were damaged. Again, within a day or two, I think the General Staff will confirm the actual damage after decoding the operational control data. Overall, the attack was quite successful. Yes, indeed, this was the second time it was attacked. I think they won't stop until it's completely shut down, just like they did with the Ryazan and Saratov refineries. Malyuk won't let go of it. Malyuk is like a bulldog. If he latches onto a shot, if he's allowed to get a grip on a shot, he won't let go until he tears him off. He won't unclench his jaws. So you can write off Novorossiysk at this point. Well, I think they'll finish it off in the near future. Kolkondrik and Malyuk, that is, they already have CSO security, which handles these long-range tasks. Well, naturally, with the help of various specialists.
The General Staff officially reports that we struck three key components of Russia's southern logistics. Chebokshary's S-400, Tuapse-Gelendzhik, and now they're reporting that in Chebokshary's oil standers, oil loading and unloading into tankers, dock equipment, and loading infrastructure have already been hit. And this paralyzes oil exports in the south. What do you think?
These are exactly the kinds of components that, in order to completely stop the technological cycle, you need to hit about 10 of them. 15 would be even better. So, in other words, the infrastructure there is quite serious. The optimal option would be to actually collapse the tunnels. There are tunnels there, so you have to get to them. Well, the security service knows perfectly well how to do it, how to approach, and how to simply take down the tunnels. And not only say the oil pumping operations would be shut down, but also the railway supplies to Novorossiysk itself, meaning the Novorossiysk port, would be affected as well. So let's do this. Let's try to predict what's next. If they really manage to reach those tunnels, it would completely stop all traffic from Novorossiysk, and the Novorossiysk Black Sea Fleet would have to look for a nice cozy spot somewhere else. The best option I'd suggest is next to the cruiser Moskva. It's warm, quiet, and nobody bothers you there. So somewhere around there.
Roman Grigorievich, the Tuapse oil refinery is one of the key refineries in the Krasnodar region. There were strikes by Baz jet drones and there were serious fires. The floor is yours.
So you can reach Tuapse, including with drones. Now the jet-powered ones have started to perform quite well. Bars drones are showing themselves. It's an operational drone with a jet engine, a turbojet engine. Most likely it uses a TRDD, a dual circuit turbojet engine. Depending on the fuel it carries, it can cover several hundred kilometers. At the very least, it rattled its way to Tuapse, if you can call it that, or rather whistled its way there, because a turbojet engine doesn't rattle, it whistles. So, with that whistling sound, Russians will now be going to sleep and waking up, because the production of these Bars drones has already been put on stream. Yes, this drone still has a relatively short range for that purpose, a few hundred kilometers. This isn't a strategic or operational level, but nevertheless it fulfills its task. By the way, it was most likely this very drone that the Pantsir missile was chasing near Tuapse, which simply missed the approach from the sea, which means they were flying at extremely low altitudes. We can say that our aircraft on the wing, which are carrying out combat missions, can fly, well, if they're below the radio horizon, that's at altitudes up to 30 meters. That is above 30 meters, the SPO, well, on an airplane, the radiation warning system, SPO, starts to indicate exposure. So they were probably flying at up to about 30 meters. That's a very good indicator, a very good one. especially since they also had to cover several hundred kilometers over the sea.
Roman Nikolaevich, also Gelendzhik Sochi air defense was operating there. Was everything just heading south, or are there also some very important military facilities there?
Well, in Gelendzhik and Sochi, there are anti-aircraft missile systems and radar stations of the Russian Federation's radio technical troops. So, in order to, say, inflict serious damage on Novorossiysk and Tuapse, it was necessary to take out not only the S-400s near Novorossiysk, but also those near Sochi and Gelendzhik. To disable the radars, or at least immobilize them, that is, stop them from working. There are mechanisms, for example, dipole reflectors, and some jamming systems are used on our drones. So our attack is actually quite complex. That's why I'm saying that the approach of aviation specialists is clearly visible here. In other words, aviation specialists are involved in these attacks, developing the aviation component for breaking through Russian air defense. And this is bearing fruit.
Roman Igorovich, Taganrog was also the epicenter of strikes. Everyone is reporting that we destroyed the unique A-60. Let's start with that, from what I managed to read. This is the main jewel of Russia's strikes, as they write. A flying laser complex built on the basis of the Il-76 with only 2 such units in the world. It is a carrier of experimental laser weaponry with a distinctive bulge on its nose. According to preliminary data from Ukrainian armed forces, and there is already video footage, it was this very aircraft that was destroyed inside the hangar. Roman Nikolaevich, your professional assessment?
Well, probably there are none left in the world now. The thing is, only a couple of them were made at the time, and one of them already burned down. So it's not exactly a laser aircraft, it's a laboratory. In other words, it's an IL-76 based aircraft, a laboratory for experiments, with the further application of laser weapons in the troposphere, that is, in the upper layers of the atmosphere, as far as the IL-76 could reach. Moreover, the tasks there were quite diverse, ranging from ground strikes with a laser to attempts to reach low-orbit satellites. And that means that satellites in low orbit travel at about 100 kilometers, right at the edge of the atmosphere. And there, by the way, mostly Musk satellites are hanging. So it's actually a pretty formidable topic if it had gone forward. This was developed by the Soviet Union. But you understand, what the Soviet Union developed, Russia simply can't handle. I think the last time this plane took to the air was in 2016. Again, for the purpose of continuing the project. That is, they wanted to see if it made sense to keep pursuing this research. As I understand it, they didn't bet on this one. But as for a specific one like this, if our unmanned systems forces have put a definitive end to this aircraft, it's unlikely they'll ever return to the topic of laser weapons in the troposphere, upper layers of the atmosphere, or in space. They definitely weren't able to effectively utilize it now, but you could certainly say we've put a permanent and decisive end to the entire Russian laser program, specifically related to the upper atmospheric layers. In other words, they basically have nothing left in this area anymore.
And of course, without a doubt, when we talk about Taganrog, everyone is discussing the situation with the Tu-95 MS bombers, which may have been damaged at the moment of the strike. Inside the hangar were strategic bombers undergoing modernization. The cost of this modernization program is reported to be $270 million for 6 aircraft. The work was being carried out in Ryazan and Taganrog. And in general, the fact that we were able to destroy at least one such aircraft, or even several, is a tremendous blow. Roman Yakovlevich, the floor is yours.
They struck at the shelters, but what exactly was in those shelters is still unclear. But at the very least, the A-100 aircraft was supposed to be there. This is an improved version, much improved, in fact, an advanced version of the A-50. In other words, it's a flying radar with longer range detection systems, almost up to 800 kilometers, about the same as the NATO AWACS. So they've managed to bring it to this level, but if we manage to damage it, I think we can write it off for good. They won't be able to get that kind of aircraft airborne again. And of course, there's also the Tu-95. Recently, the Russians have been having problems with the MCs. The thing is, back in the day, they overestimated their capabilities. They mounted 4 pylons on the Tu-95's wings, each capable of carrying 2 Kh-101 missiles. It's a heavy missile. It's one thing to have 6 missiles inside the fuselage in the rotary launcher for the Kh-55, which is what the Tu-95 was originally designed for. But it's a whole different story to load its wings with 8 more Kh-101 missiles, which are not only bigger, but also heavier than the Kh-55s. And so they started having major complaints specifically about the structural modifications to the fuselage and wings. That's why now the Tu-95s are lined up waiting for modernization and restoration. They'll either be modified or at the very least, they'll be addressing the issues specifically related to these structural problems. And naturally, apart from Taganrog, there's simply nowhere else to repair them. There's just nowhere else. The maintenance procedures are strictly defined. Inter-maintenance repairs and maintenance procedures are strictly assigned to certain certified factories. And for the Tu-95, they have only one factory, Taganrog. It just so happens that it's right next to us. It's literally within arm's reach, as they say, just break through the Russian air defense in our Donbass. And there it is, Taganrog. Good evening, we are from Ukraine. So that's more or less how the security services, or rather the drone forces of Magyar operated. That's why Magyar also says, good evening from Ukraine. Don't pay too much attention to his call sign.
Roman Grigorievich, I also wanted to ask about Taganrog. We attacked a sufficient number of military factories. They mentioned the Biryev, Atlant, Aero, and Molnia factories. And they say that for some reason the attack was carried out not only with Baz drones, but also with Neptune missiles. I'd like to hear your opinion on this. What? The Biryev Center, the Center for Aviation Modernization, Repair and Testing, Atlant Aero, the Molnia drone production facility, and the Molnia plant itself, which develops these very strike drones. They wrote that there was a series of explosions there, detonations, and large fires.
The thing is, the Baz is a missile drone, you could call it that, but its warhead is small, up to 100 kilograms, depending on the flight range. That is, if you increase the fuel, for example, the warhead size is reduced, or vice versa, at least in terms of weight. Well, and Neptune is Neptune. It has a good warhead ranging from 150 to 350 kilograms, again, depending on the type of missile used. And when Neptune comes into play, it really packs a punch. That is, first of all, it's a high-precision missile, and there's a certain know-how from our Luch Design Bureau when it comes to targeting, so-called machine vision, which means electronic warfare has no effect on it at all. The Russians kept increasing the power of their jammers, increasing and increasing it, so much so that within a radius of 100 kilometers at least, women started leaving because the men were completely useless. Can you imagine the level of radio emission after all those jammers? And yet it still doesn't make any difference. Missiles come in and complete their combat missions, just like with those chemical plants, the factories producing certain types of weapons, plus Biryova, that is the Scientific and Production Association in Taganrog. Taganrog in general is quite a serious military hub at the moment. Moreover, at one time, it was also a center for the mining and metallurgical industry. There used to be quite a few enterprises there that produced equipment for the mining and metallurgical sector, the mining and metallurgical field, but now almost everything has been converted to military production. Naturally, for us, it's like paradise. Everything is at our fingertips. As soon as we had enough missiles at the level of the Neptunes and now the Baz have appeared, it's basically like they've treated us to them. Well, if they're offering, why not accept the treat? After all, Vera Kiselzushka isn't from Ukraine for nothing.
Roman Grigorievich and Crimea, the occupied Crimea, is an important topic for both of us. I've looked at just the last 3 days, it's been constant explosions. For example, the Telegram channel Crimean Wind, almost every night, Jankoy, Kerch, Gvardeyskoye, Feodosia. This means that we are, in effect, constantly striking at depots, at Russia's logistics, at the supply infrastructure of the group in the southern direction, and at thermal power plants. The floor is yours.
And what we've been talking about for about half a year now, where drones and in general anything that flies, that is aerial targets, should be used. After the Russians' air defense density reached such serious levels, it became a major problem for us to break through it. From the sea, they can't deploy air defense systems at sea. Or rather, they could back when they had a fleet and when it was drifting around the sea like manure in an ice hole. And now with the entire Russian fleet beyond Novorossiysk, the sea is free of surface-to-air missile systems and radar systems. Moreover, they once tried to deploy radar systems and echo sounders on oil and gas platforms there, but those were knocked out. Our GUR did a great job, the Navy did a great job, they drove the Russians out, and now the approach from the sea to Crimea, and by the way, to Novorossiysk as well, is practically open. Naturally, well, it was meant to be. That is, there are enough targets, enough means of destruction on the wing, the so-called air component, the aviation component, which is now being used against Crimea. As I've said before, we've been talking about this for several years now. As soon as we have a significant air component, we will be able to effectively sweep through the entire region of Crimea, moving back and forth with strategic precision. And now we're seeing this happen. And this is even before aviation has entered the fray. So far, it's only drones and some types of missiles being used. If air defenses in Crimea are destroyed, then it's possible that aviation will come into play and start operating over Crimea. Well, just remember, we didn't teach the Russians to swim the crawl, breaststroke, and doggy paddle for nothing. Well, they could also take inflatable mattresses from the kids and paddle across on those. Well, it depends on the person.
Roman Grigorievich, remind me, was there or is there a brewery in Cheboksary? Because this morning when I started reading about the strikes, for some reason, everyone keeps mentioning the brewery. Is it located there or not?
Well, believe me, in Russia, there are breweries in every village. And in Cheboksary, there's more than one brewery. But in Cheboksary, there's a major military facility and they managed to hit it. Most likely there was a brewery nearby and it got hit as well. So the Russians have a big problem and it's precisely about beer. I've said it many times. For us, the strategic targets should be the breweries of Russia. Believe me, as soon as we start targeting this sector, Russia simply won't survive. It'll be wiped out just like that.
The reason I wanted to start with this is because of the strike on Cheboksary. At first, in the Russian social media groups, they posted information showing how the Russians were crying, just not the breweries anywhere but there, because for them it's a real stress. And then, accordingly, information appears from the general staff that the armed forces of Ukraine attacked Cheboksary, specifically the Progress plant, which manufactures navigation equipment and components for cruise and ballistic missiles. So there are modules like Kometa there, which they produce and are used in kamikaze drones like Shahed, as well as in missiles for the Iskander-M and Caliber systems, and in UMPK modules for aerial bombs. And so we attacked this plant. Roman Grigorievich, please go ahead.
It has already been hit multiple times. For example, if we take those same Russian Geran drones, they mostly use Russian and Chinese parts. The main Chinese components are servos and systems, meaning the units and assemblies of the flight module itself. But for example, the circuit boards and the same antennas, that's exactly what NIR Progress in Cheboksary makes. It's pretty far away, yes, quite far, but it still reaches, especially when the special services are involved. That is, it's precisely the special services that carry out these strikes, because to stop the process, the technological production process, you need to clearly understand which workshop to hit. And since the area there is quite large, you need to identify these key reference points. So certain work is done with our concerned informants from the special services on site. There is a certain target designation process followed by the execution of the combat mission. As for near progress, they've already struck it for the second time, at least, if not the third. I truly think that further significant strikes will eventually completely shut down its entire production, and consequently, the Chinese will have to go into hiding. Finally, they'll admit that it's a Gerbera. Geran is the Chinese Sunflower 200, and in their entirety made in China, they will supply these sunflowers. After that, we'll have the opportunity to carry out similar operations against Chinese factories. And over there are 1.5 billion informants. Believe me, the security service, the GUR, the foreign intelligence service, they'll find someone among them who will help us. Of course, our agents will have to perform eye surgery, so to speak, since the facial expressions there are rather peculiar. Well, I think, maybe in the guise of a sleepy comrade, they'll manage to find some informants.
Roman Grigorievich, now let's talk about the situation at the front. Everyone is discussing, unfortunately, that the situation in the Zaporizhzhia direction is getting worse. I would like you to comment on this.
How long have we been talking about this? Half a year. The first objective of the Russians for the summer campaign of 2025 was to expand the land corridor. We've talked about this in every broadcast since spring. All spring and summer, we've been saying this constantly, expanding the land corridor. And that means seizing the left bank part of the Zaporizhzhia region and the western part of the Donetsk region. So now they've reached Pokrovsk. They're trying to make some moves there, and they've advanced through Zaporizhzhia, especially after realizing it finally dawned on them that it's impossible to break through from south to north across the lateral roads. They can't break through either at Huliaipol, that same Chernihivka and Polohai, or at Orikhiv from the Tokmak side. So they went back from the east. In other words, yes, they advanced for a long time, 30, 40 kilometers, but nevertheless, they practically got into our rear near Huliaipol and are now trying to continue this movement along the lateral roads towards Zaporizhzhia. That is, they're coming out onto the road, onto the highway from Donetsk to Zaporizhzhia, right around the Pokrovsky area. Remember how many months we've been talking about the Russians advancing on both Pokrovsk and Pokrovsky? That's exactly on the highway to Zaporizhzhia, which is north of Huliaipol. And so the Russians advancing on Pokrovsky is essentially an attempt to cut off our main fortified positions on the Zaporizhzhia front and then move into the rear to reach Zaporizhzhia itself. That's the problem we're facing. Again, for at least more than half a year, we've been talking about what needs to be done to prevent the Russians from developing an offensive operation in the Zaporizhia direction, to deploy a strong force of security personnel. We've talked about this billions of times. Remove the exemptions from the security forces and assign 30% of the armed forces of Ukraine to the line. If we now reinforce our newly created corps, whether it was done on time or not, it should have been done earlier, but at least they're created. If we bring them up to 100% of their personnel with 100,000 troops, we can stop the Russians. Their position there isn't very good. The only thing they have is this so-called creeping offensive, and that's only because they have a numerical advantage in personnel. If we put about 100,000 troops on the line of contact, our front is about 1,200 kilometers long, but the active combat front is roughly 300 to 400 kilometers. So 100,000 would be enough to reinforce that direction and stop the Russians. Meanwhile, the drone forces, air forces, Navy, security service, foreign intelligence service, main intelligence directorate, and special operations forces will be pounding Russian rear positions and destroying the Russian economy. That's what we need to do. Why hasn't the exemption from government service been lifted yet? And why haven't the security forces been deployed? Well, only one thought comes to mind. They're just blatantly giving up Donbass and Zaporizhia to satisfy Russian demands. What other reason could there be?
Roman Hryhorovych, finally, Ukrainska Pravda claims that the Russians control most of Pokrovsk. The Vostok Group reported on the situation in the city. According to the publication, Ukrainian positions remain mainly only on the northern outskirts of Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region. In fact, that's where the line of combat engagement runs, according to the article. The floor is yours.
Well, if you look at Pokrovsk, you'll see there's a railway that roughly runs from Donetsk to Dnipro, yes, to Pavlograd, and it passes through Pokrovsk. So it divides Pokrovsk into two parts. The southern part of the railway is controlled by the Russians, while the northern part is controlled. These are the heights, the Pokrovsk heights specifically. In fact, you could say there are two of them in the Pokrovsk area. One is the Krasnoarmeyskaya Zapadnaya mine, which we control. It's 10 kilometers west of Pokrovsk. And the other is the northern part of Pokrovsk. So the Pokrovsk line is being held. But the situation is very difficult, and it will remain this difficult as long as this northern Russian claw hangs over our positions in Pokrovsk and in Myrnorod. Something definitely needs to be done about it. But again, what can be done? We need to unravel them, stop them with flanking strikes from aviation and artillery, wear down the Russians, especially since this can be done in winter. Right now, the Russians have a major problem. They can't completely push us out of Pokrovsk, and that means the Russians' northern pincer is also in a kind of semi-encirclement, just like our troops in Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad. The only difference is that we are in urban buildings while the Russian northern pincer is out in the open field, and in the field they can be worn down, especially with long-range strike capabilities from FPV drones to aviation. So there is such an opportunity. There is artillery, especially cluster munitions. If someone has, let's say, kindly provided them to us and there are enough of them, we just need to request them. Right now, with cluster munitions, this entire Russian pincer can simply be unraveled, and then it would be possible to restore, well, not the status quo, but at least to hold the line from Pokrovsk to Kostiantynivka. In other words, they need to be pushed back beyond that highway. And that was, at one time, the third line of defense, which they crawled over during the summer. Again, this has been shown and talked about so many times. We have a truly great, formidable military and astute political leadership that swiftly moved to bravely defend Kyiv from the peculiar Kursk magnetic anomaly. Just so you know, that was a joke, by the way.
Dear audience, please like this video. Roman Hryhorovych and I discuss current political events 3 times a week. The well-known military analyst Roman Svitan. Roman Hryhorovych, thank you very much. See you this Friday.
Goodbye.